Welcome to Summary Lecture 2 for your Communication Campaigns class. Of course, this content that we're going to be covering corresponds with Chapter 2 in your textbook. We're going to be talking about the 10 steps of designing a social marketing campaign. And to be honest, I guess one of the good things about your content for this week is that you're going to see it again. So if you don't quite get something, if it doesn't quite click, chances are you'll get another shot at it, because really what this chapter does is lay the groundwork, show you the steps involved with creating a campaign, and those are actually the steps that you're going to be going through each week. The textbook's set up in a way that it kind of addresses almost each step with its own chapter. There might be an extra chapter or so, and then the way this class is set up is such that each week you're going to have an activity that corresponds with one of the book chapters, but of course it also corresponds with one of these 10 steps. So this is basically an overview for everything we're going to be talking about for the rest of the semester in much more depth. For that reason, I really don't want to spend a lot of time going into the details, but I'll just give you a brief summary so you can kind of get an overview of what's going to be asked of you, what's going to be required. Again, don't freak out too much though if you're thinking, I don't know how to do that, because that's kind of the point. So, okay, so the first step is describe, plan, background, purpose, and focus, okay? So this is when you give just sort of a general overview of your topic, right? So this is when you're not really going into specifics, but maybe there's a problem that you know that you want to address with your social marketing campaign, and for instance, you're going to want to explain why it's a problem. Maybe justify your decision for focusing on a specific topic. Thinking about things like, okay, well, what is the problem, and what is the background of this problem? So if, let's say your problem is well, I'm just thinking of West Virginia problem, drinking water, right? Okay, well, why is drinking water a problem? Well, we have these runoffs from these other, from mining companies, or because, you know, maybe people, actually the example in your book was about runoff of chemicals from people's lawn into the water, whatever the case is. You would want to provide some statistics and things like that, and just give people sort of a overview of the problem itself, and really justify why this is something that needs to be addressed. At this point, you might also want to think about narrowing your focus to a specific population. This is different than what we're going to talk about the audience for your campaign, but again, maybe if you were just interested in people who lived in a certain type of environment, okay? Not specifically West Virginia, but maybe people who lived in, I don't know, northern climates with water problems or something like that. The second step in the campaign is conducting a situation analysis. SWOT, organizational strengths, weaknesses, external opportunities, and threats. So, to be perfectly honest, you need to know what a situation analysis is, and you will when we get to that chapter. But actually for your own campaign, I'm only going to have you focus on the second part of those two, because I'm actually not, you're going to realize, having you designate an organization that you're running your campaign for. I'd rather us focus more on the techniques of the campaign than on the nitty-gritty of different organizational politics. And I want you to have sort of creative license over your campaign and not have to worry about those things. So the first part of SWOT, assessing organizational strengths and weaknesses, isn't going to be so relevant to you, but we'll talk about more about that. You will be assessing external opportunities and threats, external factors that could affect the social marketing campaign that you come up with. These aren't necessarily things that you want to happen. They're things that could happen. And you're going to want to think about all those things, all those different factors that could impact your goals before you actually start doing your campaign. So that's a situation analysis. Okay, the second thing is you're going to want to select a target audience. And, you know, isn't it interesting? The minute you've done the situation analysis, you go into picking the audience and not necessarily narrowing the focus of your campaign. And that's because the audience is really the most important part. If you don't know about your audience, you're not going to really know on which behavior specifically you need to focus on in order to solve the social marketing problem that you're trying to work on. And you'll see that when we get to this, we have, there are some, we call them like planning matrices that you can use, because there might be multiple audiences that you're considering. There might be lots of people contributing to a drinking water problem, for instance, but you want to maybe pick an audience that is reachable or more persuadable, or maybe they're just contributing more to the problem. So you're going to have to kind of figure out which of the many audiences that you could target your campaign to which ones that you think you actually want to do it to. So yeah, and and just to be clear again, we'll cover all this later, but when you're selecting a target audience, you get very specific. So you'll be focusing on like a very specific age group or race group, or maybe people who have type 2 diabetes, or people who own pets, whatever the case is. That's when you start segmenting out all of the different factors from the population that you want to make the audience that you're specifically trying to reach. Okay. Step 4, set behavior objectives and target goals. Because again, up until this point, you've kind of selected a topic and you know what problem you want to work on, but you haven't really narrowed down your objectives to pick the specific goals that you want to target. For instance, somebody may want to broadly reduce the number of, I used this example in the last lecture, e-cigarette smokers. Okay, that's a pretty lofty goal, okay? But it's a much more specific goal if you say, I want to specifically focus on those people who haven't started yet, and I want to reduce the overall numbers by making it so that people don't start to begin with. That's very different than a specific objective that says, I want to make people quit. So again, after you've had your target audience and you know who you want to reach out to, then you start to determine, okay, I know who my audience is, I know how they're contributing to the problem. What are my specific objectives, though? What's sort of feasible? What am I trying to accomplish with this audience? And you'll see there's very specific types of objectives that you can spell out, and they can get more or less specific. And there's not just behavioral objectives. There can be, for instance, knowledge objectives, like, oh, well, maybe those people who are using e-cigarettes don't know it's bad for them. So I have this knowledge objective of informing them first and then changing their behavior. So again, that's all the stuff we're going to tackle in that section. Finally, number 5, we have identify barriers, benefits, motivators, and the competition. And actually, when we do this in this class, you are going to be doing this part as a group to kind of brainstorm. This is where you think about all the reasons, for instance, somebody might actually want to do exactly what you're recommending, or they might not want to do what you're recommending, because maybe there's some other behavior that seems better to them. Presumably it's a behavior you don't want them to adopt because that's not so good for them. You think your behavior is something better. But the point is kind of like when you did the situation analysis as far as the context, different factors from outside that are going to influence the outcome of your campaign. This is more kind of like a situation analysis of your audience. It's kind of trying to figure out what are the challenges that what are the hurdles that you're going to have to overcome in order to convince them that this is a behavior that they should do. Of course, it doesn't have to be hurdles. Again, sometimes you'll find people want to do this, so it's like, okay, well, how do we help them then? Maybe maybe everybody wants to install like these new fancy light bulbs that are going to save energy, but it's not affordable. So you've already got them on the same page, but a barrier might be finances or something like that. So again, those are the types of things that once you guys all have a better idea of what your social marketing campaign topic is going to be and who your audience is going to be, hopefully you guys can help each other brainstorm and think about all the different ways that your audience can respond to the recommended behavior. Step 6 is positioning, and I like to think about positioning kind of like branding. This is where you're thinking about exactly what you want your target audience to see or think about or associate with the desired behavior, okay? And actually you're going to come out with like a positioning statement, kind of like a mission statement. Like, the goal of this campaign is we want smokers to think that it's socially undesirable, right? We want them to associate this smoking with this social rejection or something like that. And actually, I mean, something to look forward to. That's probably the assignment for this semester that involves the least amount of work, because you're just going to have to develop a positioning statement, but the positioning statement is going to have to be worded in such a way that it's very clear what sort of effective outcome you're looking for in your audience. Number 7, develop a strategic marketing mix. Funny enough, this is probably the longest part of the weekly work that you'll have, because this is where you really think about, I would say, the meat of the campaign itself. This is where you think about marketing. This is where you think about messages and how you're actually going to deliver those messages and what they're going to look like, and are you going to have slogans, and what place are you going to put them in. This, I would actually argue, is when people say the word campaigns, exactly what they think of. They think of step 7, right? They're not thinking about the steps before, but, you know, you're going to get into the nitty-gritties about how do we know this message is going to be effective or not, those types of things. I do want you to sort of develop, when we get to that point, so you can be thinking about it, I am going to want you to develop some sort of visual component for your campaign. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. It could be storyboard, it could be draft, but I want you to have a vision for what your messages are going to look like. They could be brochure messages or television advertisements, or whatever is going to make sense for your audience and the behavior that you're trying to target. So do be thinking about that. The next step is Step 8 is developing a plan for monitoring and evaluation. This is because even after you figure out what your campaign messages are, you want to know if they work or not. So the next step is trying to figure out, okay, once we launch our social marketing campaign, how do we make sure it's going okay and that people are getting the desired message? And then evaluation, when it's finally over, how do we know it worked or not? And this is super important because, and I'll give you some examples when we get to that point, but you know, there's a lot of campaigns that come out and maybe not only did they not have the desired effect on people's behavior, but they had what we call a boomerang effect, and they encourage people to do the opposite of what the social marketing strategy was trying to get them to do. And that's knowledge that we need to know, we social marketers, right? Campaigners need to know that information, A, so they can correct it if something like that's going on, but it's useful to other people to know too that it's a strategy that doesn't work, right? Your campaign won't require much of a financial investment, but a lot of these campaigns do, and you don't want to keep using techniques if they're not effective. Step 9 is actually the first step of the 10 that you are not going to be doing in this class, and we're actually, because of time, I couldn't even assign the chapters. I wanted to make sure we had ample time to cover marketing and things like that. So I did not assign the step 8 or, I did not assign step 9 or step 10. But just so you know what they are, step 9 is establish a budget and find sources for financing. I'll be honest, another reason I didn't assign that chapter is because that is very outside of my expertise. And actually the truth is, this, for the same reasons, I'm not going to have you pick an organization, like a make-believe organization that you're working for, because I think it limits some of the creativity that I'd like to see with these projects. I feel the same way about budget. I do think that there needs to be, importantly, an acknowledgement of the fact that campaigns are often, usually, severely limited by budget constraints. You could have the best ideas in the world, and in order to reduce, African American women's risk of heart disease, let's say. But if you don't have the funding to pay for the staffers, to pay for the messages and all that stuff, then you can't launch that campaign. Or maybe you can launch it, but you're going to have to launch it on a much smaller scale. So number 9, after you have a campaign plan in place, is where you say, okay, well, how are we going to pay for this? Can we pay for it? And if not, going back and revising it until you can figure out how it's more financially feasible. And then finally, step 10 is complete an implementation plan. And this is where you are very specific about all the tasks that are going to go into the campaign. Who's going to do this? When are they going to do it? How much time are they going to spend doing it? How much is it going to cost? And I would say one way to think about an implementation plan is the practical plan, right? The sort of the roadmap for division of labor and timing and things like that. And again, you're not going to really do that for this class, but you should know that obviously it's a very important part. So that's a summary of all 10 steps in the social marketing plan. The only other really important thing I want to add to this is that even though, and your book acknowledges this, firstly, even though a lot of people would love to have this sort of step-by-step approach to campaigns, often not, it's a lot more chaotic in the real world. So I guess you're lucky that you have so much structure from this class or whatever. But all of these steps do happen, but maybe not in such an ordered way. And actually, speaking of order, that's another important point, which is that this is presented very linearly. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. The truth is, as I already said, sometimes you have to go back and revise, right? You get to your budget point and you're like, oh gosh, I was going to do this whole TV campaign, and now I realize, like, I'm not going to have funding for advertising. Okay, let's rethink this. What's another way to reach our audience? Or maybe you have to switch audiences after you really start thinking about the objectives and goals, and you realize there's a mismatch, right, between the audience you selected and maybe goals that you really think are important or things like that. There will be some room for that in this class too. You're going to be turning in these weekly assignments that take you through the steps, and ideally at the end, right, you should be able to take those assignments and then write up a campaign proposal based on all the steps you've done. But it could be that, like, when you get to step 5 and you start thinking about things, you're like, oh shoot, you know, I might need to go back and tweak some things about step 2. That's completely fine. And I should tell you that if you ever are thinking about things like that, let's say I've already given you some feedback and said, I like the direction you're going in, keep going, and you say, Dr. Cohen, you know what, I think I really need to change something in my audience or whatever. I'm not going to regrade everything and give you all a full new feedback and go through each step. But what you should do is you should email me or set up a time to talk to me on the phone, and we can talk about whether or not this is really necessary or if this is what you want to do. But at the end of the day, the idea is to hopefully make it so that you can go through each step and they build on each other. And then at the end, you'll have this nice, complete stack of assignments that you can just transform into the perfect social marketing campaign proposal. So hopefully that's what will happen. In the meantime, just to sort of test your knowledge on the proposed order of these objectives and what they actually entail, make sure, of course, you read Chapter 2 and then go on eCampus and take the quiz or exam, I don't know what eCampus calls it, on these different objectives. And I think that'll pretty much set you up for the week. So, all right, thank you. See you for the next lecture. Bye.